So today, what we're going to do is in this pivot point at HQ, we're going to jump into financials for a eight-figure brand. The reason why we do it, we always want to start with business health. What most people do is they jump straight into either ad platform or straight into the attribution tool. But we want to establish business health first because we all know that the ad platform is lying to us. Attribution is modeled, it's directional. But the only truth that we have are the numbers in Shopify versus against all the costs and all the other numbers that we have. So we want to know all the stuff, the unit economics, new versus returning. We build a whole P&L basically outside of that, and then we can benchmark that against what we see in the attribution tools and the ad platform. That's what we're going to do today. So we're going to real in-depth things. With me is my wonderful strategist right now, and we're going to dive straight in. Then feel free to take this part.
So this one was the most important one. Like when we deep dive into the financials of any brand, especially if you want to like really help them with ad platforms, either Google, Meta, or Amazon, whatsoever. We want to start by understanding the economics. To know how leverage you have in order to push the ad spend or pull the ad spend, so you're not unaware about that if you're hurting or basically supporting the business. And that's where starting with unit economics, you just need to take one unit and start from there. In their case, what they sell is an apparel, and most of the people buy it one time and then they don't come back as much. So it's not a subscription model per se. And so this, what we we wanted to start with what's the new AOV, like how much is the dollar amount that a customer purchases, which was $51, right? Now, based off the discount, we have to deduct that discount from it because this new AOV is taken from gross sale Shopify. So you deduct the discount because discount means nothing. It just discounted. So we take the customer price, like this is the actual customer price that was paid, which was $48. Now then we have to take into consideration, then they have refunds and returns and all of that, replacement. We take that out of the picture, and the average is 6.5 for them. Sometimes we also have a shipping income associated to it. We collect shipping, and this data, you can find it on Shopify. For their case, it was a 0.08. We deducted that. Then COGS are at 27 and the merchant processing is at 2.9, which is, I'll be on, like this is on a higher end. Usually an e-com business has it at a 2.5. So as you know, and you work with a lot of businesses, you can sort of benchmark, like where are they overpaying and where they're losing their margin, which brings my contribution margin 1 to a $30. Now, this is just right out of the gate of the COGS, fulfillment, refunds. We have not even touched marketing, right? And then that's where the major amount comes in. Acquiring a customer is going to cost you even more. And that's where you bring in your NMR. NMR is basically also a calculation of like how efficient your marketing is. So let's say that my marketing, I'm able to acquire an NMR of 1.5, which brings my nCAC at a $32. So $32, I have to further deduct it to get a contribution margin 2, right? Now, this is the unit economics, and with 1.5, I'm actually losing $1.65 on that first purchase. So that's breaking even, right? Now, I look at the LTV, like let's say, sometimes you have to pay more to acquire a new customer, and the actual amount, the dollar amount you earn is when they come back. And that's how some of the businesses are built on. In their case, this LTV ratio was not that great that they would be able to sustainably scale at a break-even nCAC. And that's where you see that the first month they're actually not making any profit on that first purchase. They're first losing that $1.60 on the first, and then on the second they are hardly making 4 cents, and then on the third they're making a $2 and $2.80 on fourth, and so on and forth. This model is not good. So this, what we have understood is that my NMR at a 1.5 is not really making me a lot of money. Now I need to change it. And if I move it to, let's say we move it to 1.7 or 1.8, the numbers automatically change. Now I'm going to be more profitable in that sense. So depending on that level, we benchmark. Now as you can see, making $3.96, and my NCAC is come down to 26. Now I get that I'm starting to make profits right away from that first purchase. This is where we start. This is the basic unit economics. One other thing that I would want to point out is that if you see the first, the B2, the repeat contribution margin one is 58. And if you see B16, your new contribution margin one is 63. Now, there is already 5 points less on the contribution margin for the repeat. Right. So if you even more, aggressively spend on your repeat, it is further going to hurt you, because you cannot overpay your repeat, because you're already dealing with a smaller margin on the repeat contribution margin one. Right. So this is what we understood, and then we moved to understanding what was that period where they were able to come close to a 1.8 for the new customer, and then from there we benchmark, which I think is one tab before this one, which is P&L new versus repeat.
Yeah, so before we go into that, I want to highlight why this is so important, right? Because we start with this with every single brand. We don't even touch their ad platform. We just start here. Well, the reason why is we want to know where they currently stand, this is the core. Like if they don't make money on the first, second, or third purchase, and again, it depends. Do you have a subscription model? Do you have a different type of model? So this gives you a foundational knowledge of like where you stand, but also how much should you spend on marketing based on the margins that they have left. And if they have a certain margin that they want to keep for themselves, we can take that into account as well. But it basically creates the nCAC or the NMR that we need to hit to get these numbers in the door. Now, again, it is important that that all these numbers are correct, because obviously when something is off, you'll get a completely different output. So make sure you double check that with the client. With us, these are based on averages of the last 12 months. That's typically how you do it. The COGS are typically a fixed number, sometimes not. Then you have variable COGS, but at least you can come up with a formula that works here. And you want to get this as close, as accurate as possible, because everything from here is built on that. So then we go to this sheet.
Yeah.
This is your returning and new and total. Now the reason, again, like most are focused on buzz or just an MER. You want to dissect new and returning, because we already saw here that the margins on repeat and the margin on your regular news are different. So we want to split it up and see how are we individually performing, because we have seen brands that are in high 8 figures. They're thinking they're doing good, but when you dissect it, you see that the growth of new is declining while returning is taking them over. The blended looks good, but if you look individually at new, it doesn't look healthy. So that's why you want to do it. Please continue.
Yeah. So for them, it was pretty much established that because there's not much returning, so you cannot rely much on the returning for more than 1 month, right? And
here.
if yeah. So what we did was basically we went into historical performance. Like on the new, you would see that the NMR until the September 2025 was averaging around a 2, and then from there it just dropped,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you can see it drops here.
And that's where, yeah. And so what we need to understand now is like if you look at the end profit contribution, there were months where they actually lost money. And which also again gives you an idea that if I go below 1.3 on my new customer acquisition, it is not going to help. And
Yeah.
then even because, as we know, like you cannot recoup all of that money from returning, because your returning is also not that great. 10-20% returning, um that's not a healthy number.
And you
So
can see
from
it here.
there,
When we put in the number 1.3, you immediately see what's going to happen, right? You're losing money here, you're losing money here, and it only recoups,
yeah,
well, right about here, which that's not a place you want to be in. It doesn't make any sense.
exactly. So what we looked at was anything before September was pretty much efficient. They were acquiring the customers properly. The NCAC was low. Now I go back to the media channels, like what was my ad platform doing? And then that's where the MPI sheet that we create for the clients would be, starting to benchmark. So when we know that for more longer than 1 month you cannot rely on your returning, so you need to maintain a consistent new visit to the website, right? So that you can consistently acquire new customers. So we compared September, like starting September until last month with previous period, and we benchmark a new visit for Meta, which if we look at the last 30 days, it had dropped significantly. And so that's where then we dig deep into like what channel ad spend fluctuations had happened in between. They increased the ad spend on app loving. When they did that, their P&L went into negative, and there was not enough new customers that were acquired. So making sense of all of that, and you look at a trend line that as the new visits on the Meta went down, the profitability also crashed. So then we spoke about a lot of like solutions to the client, like what can we do. And then until we fix all of that, we cannot really contribute to top line with just, let's say, Google, because here you see it's like what, 5% of the total ad spend.
Yeah, it's a lower amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I want to emphasize here is the moment. So when we cut this out, right? So this is September to November. This column is very important. This column is very important, and obviously this one as well. So where we're using, in this case, triple wheel for is mostly for establishing new visitor percentages. Again, this is not accurate. It's directional. It's modeled, but at least we have a benchmark for what it was. Cost per new visitor. Okay, $2.07. What was it from September to this period right here? So if we're looking here, that was September until October. We still had this 1.68, 1.4, and then November was worse. But these months were still pretty good. And before that, they were actually very, very healthy. So here we saw that, new visitor percentage was high. Now, what is it in the last 30 days? If we look at June or May, actually, we can see that we're hitting a 1.34, right? So benchmark wise, we dropped from a 90, what was it? A 97, 98 down to a 74. That is crazy. Yeah. So we had a major drop. So what actually happened here is that they started without their knowing, because the NCRS looks at the 0.9. Here it's still 0.91. So you could say, oh, performance is great. Performance is pretty much equal on NC-ROAS, so you should be good. No, it's not, because these numbers will tell you a completely different story. You dropped, your budget went more to returning than to new. And for some reason, you paid double the amount or more for a new visitor. Now, imagine you having a certain restrictive AOV and your new cost per new visitor doubles, but your conversion rate stays the same. Now you have a big issue because your nCAC simply starts to double as well. See, that's the problem. So we have to find, this is obviously from a very top level, strategic level, what happened to that new visitor. and the cost per new visitor. And now we have to dig in and see, okay, why did it happen? Is it a creative issue? Is there something on Meta? What is going on? So, but you can establish at least, okay, these are the things we're going to work with. We need to work with the MVP. We need to work with the customer per new visitor. And then, we obviously here have the NCPP, which is the new customer purchase percent, which is around 73, 74% here. And that was also 88%. So in all ways, shapes, or forms, it basically tells us the money flowed simply more to returning and warm traffic rather than new, without their knowing, because they were simply not aware of it, because they looked at this number right here and it tells you a different story. And so with
that
Meta,
is one thing we see like all the time, right? Like with all these brands, especially when it's an expectation, which we see 9 out of 10 times, that Google is always over appreciated, because look at that NC ROAS of 2.79.
Yeah, like this would tell, and a noob would say, oh man, why is Google at 82K? We should spend all this money on Google. Yeah, no, because they got a lot of brand involvement. And what you'll see is that the money that you put here has influence on direct traffic. So that the 2,000 sales here are also partially coming from Meta. Meta is basically the engine and pushes a lot of budget into Google. Now, if you would stop putting money into Meta, you have a bit of a delay effect, and then you also see your Google Ads plummeting, because it's pretty much that fueling flywheel system that pushes brand but also helps non-brand move. So this is the thing. Most brands look at the attribution tool, and nowadays they know, like, okay, we should maybe not look at Google Ads in isolation exactly, but how should you look at it then? Because most have no clue where to begin. They use their third-party tracking tool, and they take that as kind of like the North Star. And this is also why we look at first click, because we want to know. I mean, again, it's modeled, but at least it gives us an impression of like, okay, what is the first click for the channel, ideally? But it does not mean that Meta has always in this case, does not fuel Google on this first click, because that is still happening. You still, it's still not as accurate as possible. We're not living these times. And so the benchmark of what's happening here versus, we talked about the MPI sheet. Actually, do we have the ability to show the MPI sheet? Let me see if I can.
I think so.
Hold that up 1 moment. I have to blur that real quick.
Like all these ad platforms are built and they just want to look good, and that's where I think the brands also get lost in that whole concept of like what, because Meta does not want you to go away because you spend like $1 million, and if the numbers do not look good, you will probably not spend as much. And so they are just like, they find a way. For example, everybody who manages Meta, they think that exclusions work on the campaigns. They don't work, because the algorithm somehow finds an alternative way to show the ad to the same person that you had excluded. And that's what happened with them. Like their Meta rep gave them a recommendation, and when you said that you don't take gambling advice from the casino owner, that's exactly like sums up the whole situation. Because if your rep is saying blah blah blah, you have a very good creative score and all of that, and you're listening to your Meta rep, who represents, by the way, Meta stakeholders and not your company stakeholders. It is so.
Isn't that
like,
beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Like it's like the only KPI that they care about is, you need to spend more money. They don't care about returning.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the combination.
I've never heard like the Voldemort for them is they never take the name for new customers, returning customers. Like they've never mentioned these metrics ever on the call.
True. Neither Google doesn't do that, Meta doesn't do that. Like they are only. You can also imagine the reps this is also, and this is a bit of side scroll, but let's get into it. When I hear an agency say, yeah, we got an old person that is now head of Google that worked at Google, I'm like, well, that's not good, because they most of the time simply only know the side of Google, which is just, how can we make it spend more? But they never optimized an account for the business. They know really well what products Google have and what it should do theoretically, but practicality not so much. And so when we establish the things here, and we have the unit economics, we have the new versus repeat. Now, of course, we see here, okay, this is anything that is above a 1.3 is kind of like where we need to be. So September-wise, 2025, we're at 1.68. Where were we monthly at those numbers, right? And MER-wise. So now here you can see a bit of a pattern from this is not the greatest one. We get closer here. So it was actually, what is this? January was one of those months where it was a 1.72 and 2. So now we start to benchmark the months against them, and then we kind of go into the attribution here to really benchmark what was working, what was not working. So if we go all the way back, for example, to January and check out, okay, 1.72, that looks good. Go back into Triple Wheel, search for that time frame, go into that and see what you're going to do. It's just all benchmarking. It's, again, not taking the attribution as truth. It is starting with your business numbers, looking at what is actually happening, and then start to benchmark against that. That's what you want to do, because the rest is just not optimized for you. You got to be smart.
Yeah, like if you go to that MPI sheet and that particular November month, you see that the NMR dropped to like 1.3. And then, that was the point when the brand had to learn from it, because they actually lost money on acquiring new customer. And that actually had to be compensated with the amount that was made from returning. So in November, they discounted heavy because Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and all of that. They lost all of that money, which they had to recoup in the next coming months. That was like, okay, mistakes happen. We all do all these silly mistakes, but learn from it and see how can we not repeat those mistakes. And that is what is happening again, because there's no concept of new returning, where to be more profitable and how can we, and then they continue to spend more at the same time. So that's not.
This is what you get. That spending more money is what you get when you look at a blended number. So they're looking at this number. You think, okay, we're doing good. We're pretty much equal to where we were at. So you say, okay, let's spend more money. And they're like, oh, cool. We still are at this point. But the problem is this one goes, well, this one went a little bit up, but then basically goes back down. And you can see here what happened with the new customer ratio in the last 3 months. It's actually terrible. Like, obviously, when you start, this is where they started. They grew pretty heavily, started with 77K. They grew hard. So yes, there's high numbers here, new customers, that slowly goes down over time. But however, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not dissecting this, you have no sight on what's happening. So this MPI sheet is for us, like the top line metric, the engine, what is happening? Are we good on new versus returning? And then the tools that we typically use is Blood Out for actually directing more to net new traffic. We can see that also a bit in here where you can see that Google doesn't. Let's just go into this one, for example, because they had another thing for Google where, and this is good because we're going a little bit into tactical advantages here as well. You can see that the NVP on Google here is 92%. This channel is optimizing on first click new customers. What does that mean? We basically have a tool, Blood Out, that helps us drive first click new customer data back into Google so we can actually optimize on that. So your regular Google native pixel, what it does, it's trained for an ad click, but it's not trained for that first click attribution in that sense from this ad stack tool. It has a whole infrastructure and technology that I'm not fully aware of, but I know kind of like what it does. And what it does is that it directs the algorithm in a different direction, more towards net new traffic. Now you can see here that the branded, and this is good, like if this is branded traffic, alphas and betas. So if this is 62, 68%, and also 53, then what it basically means benchmark-wise, that anything that has a new visitor percentage between 53% and 68% could be considered warm bottom of the funnel traffic, right? This number, 62%, doesn't tell us anything. It's just a benchmark number. So then if we launch a Performance Max campaign, and this has happened as well, where the Performance Max was doing 72%, it is just doing returning traffic and warm traffic. That's all it does, right? The benchmark. So we need something like this to know, okay, this is actually going outside of the bubble after some cold audiences. And that's for Google important, because Google in typically, because the pixels get the clicks from both Meta and Google, and they both go after the same customer, it just skews the data on the in-platform. Performance Max is very, very notorious for retargeting Meta traffic and just gathering that Meta traffic in and just taking credit for it. And so your PMax looks good on paper, but it actually is not contributing incrementality to your business at any point. So you want to know, like, what are we doing here with MVP? Yeah, and so these are the campaigns. So this is what they're pushing. Now, again, this campaign right here, even though it's first click new customer and it's directing to more colder audiences, it does not mean that it is not being fueled in partially by Meta. Because the moment we shut down Meta, what we'll see is that this campaign likely, even with these numbers, is going to start to plummet in performance. Because, you know, just as you, as a human being, if you drive on the highway, you get every time a billboard from a specific product, and then you're going to search for it, it has influenced your decision. So there's still some effect of that here. So we got to be great. And this is, again, when we have established the financial sheet, the MPI sheet, and the thing, we want to build a certain MMM. And Rachna, you can go more in depth on that. We want to build a bit of an MMM here, like, okay, if Meta scales with X, then Google follows with X. We don't scale Google typically outside of Meta, because what you see is that it just increases your new customer acquisition costs. And as we know that we have to stay close to whatever it says here, 37 is kind of like, oh, sorry, that's actually 12. We need to be at the 1.5, 1.6, right? If 1.5 is the absolute minimum. So we cannot sustain an nCAC that is higher than 32. And that is even barely profitable. So ideally, we want to be at a 1.6.
Yeah. It's like, it's basically understanding like what percentage of ad spend can I afford to spend it on my repeat. And if I overspend it on my repeat, I'm going to lose even more money, which I was hoping to make from the returning customers. And that is where, like, if your meta is already heavy on the returning side, so you're already overpaying. And on top of it, I bump my budget on Google, which is again bottom of the funnel. And then it also starts, overspending on returning. So your contribution margin one on the repeat that we saw was already lower than the new, is now going to get further pushed, and you'll again lose money on your returning as well, because you are anyway not making money on the new. So that is where, yeah, and that is where understanding all of that is very important. Like, you know, that are you unintentionally hurting a business? It's just the worst situation to be in, and you do not want to do that. And you would need to know the whole picture of like how everything is combined together, and how can you actually make the business profitable and not make yourself look so good. Oh, look at my ROAS and look at Meta's ROAS is like negative, like 0.5, and mine is at 3x. I am the best in the world. Like, that does not help.
And now imagine the case, right? This is happening so often. We've seen it so many times. There's still too many, and I would say 90% of the agencies, freelancers out there that are focusing on platform health. Now, with the knowledge that you just got from this clip, knowing that, okay, you understand why you want to start business first and attribution and platform second and third, you understand that, and you understand that that platform is lying to you. Now, if you have an agency that just optimizes ROAS on the platform, it will make the wrong decisions, and it will start to waste ad spend because it sees like the number in the ad platform is taking double credit for it. It's not taking into account any of your margins. And therefore, you're simply, I can guarantee you, wasting money on the platform because nowadays the wasted ad spend is in between the channels, not necessarily on the channel. It is also on the channel, but if you scale Google heavily while Meta stays stable, you don't scale them in conjunction, then what you'll get is that your nCAC starts to rise. You have no idea, and the agency says, well, look at this beautiful ROAS, it's looking good. And you're just like, yes, but my bank account is going down. Like we're decreasing profits. Why? Where is it happening? It's this, because they have no idea of your business health. So the moment they use the word return on ad spend, we optimize return on ad spend, what do? You run. You only have to run in a different direction.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer valid. Unless you have benchmarked all these numbers against a certain ROAS, that would make sense. But typically, it's not really easy to do that. So most people have not come to that point.
This is understanding the whole business, and it is not easy. A business owner would know all of this. Like, if you are a business owner, then you know these numbers are overwhelming, and you just want to pull your hair out, like where things have gone wrong. And if somebody is trying to give you a solution without understanding all of that, then it's full of crap, that person or that agency. So first of all is, like even some agencies, they'll be like, oh, we want to optimize for profit. And what do? Oh, we'll just do profit metrics and we'll set the campaigns up to optimize it for profits. And that's it. Which is, again, it's like same thing I find. It's just random strategies placed in, but there's no holistic picture starting from the top to bottom, breaking down everything possible.
Agreed. And just to show you, right? So here on, as we see a decline here in NMR from basically here all the way down. Now look what the ad platform basically tells us. Oh, you're doing good, you're doing fantastic, you're doing good, you're doing good. And only here we see a bit of a decline, but it's also because they have increased their spend on Google, doubled it. They doubled it. Right? And the ROAS looks like 7, 5, 6. If you look at platform ROAS from a 7, it's still sustainable. But if we almost double the budget, or at least 80%, and it still gives you a 4.3 to a 4, man, that looks healthy. That looks really, really good. However, in the meantime, your business margins are going down severely, and you're just actually not in a great place. Now, this might be one of those things. We have to dig deeper, but this is likely one of the causations because we're scaling Google outside of what Meta's doing. Meta is also volatile, but we have to dig. Priority is obviously fixing Meta because it spends so much more, and Google is just a following channel here. And also here we can see that there has been fluctuations with Axon or AppLovin for the people that know that name. Of like, where's this money actually going to? And a lot of people are taking a channel like this and taking money from a Meta and putting it into an Axon just to test it out. But you don't want to do that. You want to keep everything stable and then add new money in here to see what it actually contributes or takes away from. Because you see, like, it's all over the place. And that's not a strategy. That's just a guesstimate and trusting an attribution tool, because Axon looks good on attribution tools. But if it truly is contributing to the bottom line, that is something you cannot trust an attribution tool to do.
Like, for example, if you take an example, we know December was the worst month. They lost money. Like, they were not profitable. I think they had to pay from their own pocket. If you look at November, what is the ROAS on Meta?
For November, December was 1.98.
And yeah, I think they were also, it was in October. I don't remember. Can you check the financial sheet? What months were there on the new? I think it was November and October.
Yeah, I think these two were terrible. Yeah, 1.4, 1.3. Yes, they lost money. Yeah. So
Yeah. So
November was the
October and
worst.
November, if we look at the ROAS, it's 1.6.
Yeah, 1.63.
Looks
Yeah,
good, right?
it looks quite
Compared
decent.
to other months.
Yeah, it doesn't look as significant problematic. I mean, it's a zero point 0.3 step away from where we're at. It looks like it's going down, but it doesn't look that detrimental. You can see the signs on the wall here that, that it simply started to go down. So yeah, no, there is a benchmark level to this where you say, okay, we do see something. But again, it's a blended number. It doesn't tell us. If returning suddenly went up due to a sale, this number could be a 2.2, and we wouldn't know. The only thing we would know is like on this side, we would see, on this side, we would see that the new customer is starting to decline. So you can, from this sheet, you can see trends, and then you have to dig deeper. And the same thing with this one, right? This is true business metrics. Okay, where are we at? Because it's so easy to get lost as a media buyer into your ROAS. I mean, I've been there 2 years ago where, that's how we optimized. But it's no longer working because there's too much wasted ad spend in between the channels. If you cannot look over the edges of your platform, which from worst case is mostly Google, if you cannot look over that to see what's happening around you, you're working in a silo and you're destroying partially that brand. I can guarantee you, because you're spending either too much or too little, but definitely not attributing to the business health.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add somewhere here?
I think this whole stuff is the most difficult, and it takes a skilled marketer to do all of that. Most of the people want to just, fool around and not really help the business. And I
They're
think a
lazy.
business owner, and lazy too. So need to just cut through the noise. Like the business owner needs to understand that how can you identify if your marketing agency is bullshitting you, is like by this, like I need you to really help me. And how can you really help me, is with it, my financials. Like how can you help me maintain my financial and scale? Not like, I can spend on Meta and we can, do a certain ROAS and that's it. So I think that is like sometimes even we have to convince the client, like the prospect, like why we need all of this data. And it is, sometimes owners are skeptical, like why do an agency need all of this? But it's very important. Like you need to trust the agency. And if you can't trust your agency with your financial numbers, are you seriously going to trust them with your actual dollars to spend on the ad platform? That doesn't help.
Yeah, it's kind of like going to the doctor, and then the doctor prescribes you a medicine in his best interest, but he lacks the knowledge. How bad is that? You have a certain condition, and he describes you the wrong prescription. In real life, that would be malpractice. In digital agency life, that would be a burn on your radar. So, if an agency is not able to diagnose or to all the way track it back to business health, that is actually a sign on the wall. They might do it with the best interest. And obviously you could say, yeah, but you guys are an agency. You have something to sell. So this is obviously the way you talk. Maybe, yeah, but it's also, if we look at asking the right questions, and this is obviously the right question to ask, if they cannot track it back to business health, then they don't know what they're doing. So it's as simple as that. And,
Exactly.
for us, our client retention is at least 2 years or longer, which is very rare in the agency world because most of them churn after 3 months because the salespeople set different expectations than the fulfillment can actually handle because they get commission. So there's a whole pipeline of things, and we don't want to get into all that, but in general, that tells you something, and that's just what you need to do. Find the right fit, and I think from a brand standpoint, that's the hardest part. As for agencies, it's sometimes the hardest part to find the right clients. So as long as you ask the right questions and And that's for business owners sometimes also confronting, because sometimes we have seen as well, the business owners are not very aware of their own numbers sometimes. Because everybody has a part where they love to do. It's either resourcing or creating new products or whatever it is. And nobody really loves to do the financial stuff. That is where the CFO comes in. But nowadays, the true media buyers with the true power is where they leverage media buying, the financial standpoint, and also the marketing department. So these three are coming into one. And then nobody gives a F about the AI. Like, AI helps AI get things faster. We're using it for tools for making faster decisions, getting faster insights, but it's not replacing it. Because if you know what you know now and say, okay, let's take an AI and an MCP server to push changes on Google or Meta based on the wrong data interpretation, you're going to have a fast lane to a massive crisis with your brand. AI is not going to fix that for you. AI is there to make faster decisions, help you do research, et cetera, but it's not going to take over this level of integration.